Hello. So this is a short video I've made on showing you how to create texture effects by using the layer blending modes and a little bit of a description of what layer blending modes are and how they work. And so for the first part of the demonstration, I'm going to take this picture of the trees and I'm going to overlay it onto this picture of the lake. So the first step is that the first step is that I open both of the images in separate Photoshop windows. The next step is that I'm going to copy and paste this image into this image. So first I need to do select all, that's Command A, edit copy, Command C, and then I will go to this image and I will edit paste, which is Command V. And now I have the picture of the trees sitting in a layer on top of the picture of the background. And I'm turning the eyeball on and off here so that you can, the visibility is turned on and off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with the blending modes. Now what a blending mode is it is a essentially a mathematical formula that determines how the pixels that are in this layer interact with the pixels that are in this layer. So the pixels that are in layer 1, the tree layer, how are they interacting with the pixels below them? And by default, the blending mode of all the layers is set to normal. And what that means is that assuming that this layer is 100% visible, then it's completely blocking the layer beneath it and I have no idea what's even in that layer, were I to not turn this one off. But if I click here where it says normal, you'll see there's a window that pops up that has all kinds of other things listed, and these are different blending modes. And if you want to see what they do, you can just scroll through, and if you look as I'm scrolling through, you'll notice that the way that the tree layer is interacting with the layer beneath it is changing each time I scroll through to create different effects, some of them perhaps useful, others not, okay? And you don't need to remember what any one of these really does in particular because you can always just hover over each one of the names and see what happens. Now, just to sort of roughly characterize them, this top little quadrant here, in these blending modes, the layer that's on the top where the pixels are darker will generally affect the pixels beneath it. In this section, the opposite is true. The layer on top where the pixels are lighter than the pixels below it, it will affect it. The overlay through hard mix, those are playing with luminance channels and really looking at more at the texture. Difference, exclusion, subtract, and divide use some kind of crazy math to create different color effects with the hue and saturation channels, as do the hue, saturation, color, luminosity. Again, it doesn't matter what they all do. You don't need to memorize what each one does by any means, okay? But generally speaking, the ones in this section here are useful for textures, as can be some of these in the first two quadrants. And I'm just going to look at it and pick one that I think looks maybe kind of interesting. Oh, I don't know. Let's see. I might even do the darker color because I like what's happening with the tree right here. And then keep in mind that once I have that blending mode changed, obviously now I can see through to the layer beneath it, but I could also change the overall opacity, meaning the density of the top layer, to make that effect more or less pronounced. So for example, if I wanted it to be more subtle, I could do something like this. Or in addition to that, that was through the opacity slider, or in addition to that, I could add a layer mask and then selectively paint in or out areas of this effect that I wanted to see. So I could click on the add layer mask right here. And you see I now have a layer mask. You'll recall from the first layer mask basics video that white reveals and black hides. And I could go in and paint with black in the layer mask to selectively hide this effect or blend it in more. Now keep in mind that if I paint with black, so I've hit D to get my default colors and X to switch between the two of them, and then I can go to my paintbrush, and if I want, I can change the opacity of my paintbrush to a very low number, I don't know, I'll put it around 22%. And I have a large brush and I could just kind of go like this. And as I'm painting, I don't know why I would change any of these particular effects or areas, but let's just for the sake of argument go ahead and do it. And you'll notice that as I'm painting, my layer mask is getting some gray areas in it here. And I'm sort of blending away selectively that effect in various areas of my image. And I could do that however I want. And if I wanted to add it back in, I could paint with white and I could slowly bring the effect back in areas that I wanted it to affect the underlying image. Okay, so that's part one in how you can use an image over another image, okay, to create a blending or a blended image, I guess. Another thing that you can do is you can create use either photographs of textures or a plain blank color layer to create some interesting effects. So this is the composite that I made in the layer mask basics video. And what I'm going to do just for fun is I'm going to lay a texture over this entire thing. But I'm going to choose a different type of texture. I'm going to choose this picture of kind of a crumbling wall that I took at some point. Okay. And so I'll do the same thing I did previously. I'm going to do select all, edit, copy, and then I'll go to my picture of Iceland here and I'll command V, which is edit paste. Now right now this texture, this is a lower resolution camera and so it's too small, but that's okay because I'm going to put it right up here in the corner. I'm going to go to my move tool, which I was actually already in, go to my move tool. Remember that you can check the show transform controls. When I check show transform controls, that gives me the little boxes on the edge and will allow me to pull this larger. So I'm going to pull it so that it fills up the entirety of the frame and I'll hit the checkbox. Now what I can do again is go here into the blending modes and hold this over each of the possible blending modes. And you'll see a similar thing is happening that happened in the last one. But in this case, it's not with a picture, or it is a picture, but it's with a textural picture and not with something that is creating lines or patterns. And here I'm almost creating the effect now that this scene was painted onto some kind of a wall that's now peeling, and you can see the texture that's coming through. I chose overlay for my blending mode, and overlay or soft light can have similar effects like that. So now that I have that blending mode selected, it's creating this kind of, as I said, it almost looks as if this is a painting that's been done on a crumbling wall. And maybe I want to see my sheep a little bit more clearly or blend this a little bit more. As previously, I could go to my opacity and I could make that texture layer a little bit less dense and therefore make the effect more subtle. Or I can add a layer mask. Oopsie. And I can selectively paint away parts of it that I don't want to see. So I've gone to my paintbrush again. I have my opacity set very low again because I want to kind of blend it in. And perhaps I'll paint kind of in this middle. I have a really huge brush. Maybe I'll just kind of paint in this middle to take that effect away a little bit here. And now you can see I still have like a little bit more detail in my middle, but I've added this sort of textural effect over the overall image. The last kind of effect you can do with the blending modes, or it's perhaps not the last, but it's the last I'm going to show you in this video, I'm going to turn this layer off, is by adding a new color fill layer. You can add a layer that's comprised of solid color, and you can use it to tint or tone your image to a different, a warmer, a cooler, just an overall sort of a different look. In order to do that, I'm going to go to the layer menu, and I'm going to go to new fill layer, solid color. So layer, new fill layer, solid color. And then I will get this dialog box, and I'm going to tell it to leave it in normal blending mode for now, opacity 100%, and just say okay. And when I do, it will give me the color picker here where I can pick a color that I want to add. I'm going to add kind of a yellowy orange color, I think. And I'm just picking this very arbitrarily. And I'll say okay. So now I have this solid color fill just sort of sitting on top of my image. But if again, I change the blending mode of that layer, I can get a whole host of different color effects. And if I use the hue in particular here, I can create a little bit of a tint or an overall, I don't know, overall tint or tone to the image. And this is kind of interesting if you're trying to create the effect of like an old or weathered picture. Doing a hue solid color layer with a lower opacity can kind of give you that faded look of an older photograph. But of course, there's also all kinds of different effects. If I want sort of more psychedelic effects, for example, I could do something like this. Some of these look like those old like rock posters or whatever, like this kind of thing. So if you're trying to create some really odd effects, you could certainly choose a different blending mode. And again, you don't have to use any of these uh, techniques or tricks, but you're welcome to do so if you want to experiment a little bit as you're making your composite.